the demand for managed services is through the roof. I think you see this. I mean, if you don't see this, then, believe me, take my word for it. If you don't want to take my word for it, look around. Managed services growth is undeniable. It has been around forever, and it has certainly matured and grown at staggering rates that I never even thought possible when I started in this industry. Businesses need the help of their MSP. They need help with cybersecurity. They need help with general IT issues. They need help with compliance. They need help with cybersecurity. They need help with so many different things. Demand is not the issue. You have to make profitability the issue with your company, right? Growth will take care of itself. You can find a way to grow the top line. No one is going to help you with the bottom line. You're going to have to do that yourself. For years, the MSP profession has been focused on growth, and for good reason. MSPs have been kind of taught to search and add more ARR, annual recurring revenue, or MRR, monthly recurring revenue. They're told you should be getting more customers. You should be getting more endpoints under management. You should be selling more security services. By default, they are also being told you should expand your number of vendors that you use to deliver your services. And for the most part, I would say that message has been, I don't want to say necessarily a good one, but it's not a bad one either. Growth has been relatively easy over the last 5, 10 plus years for MSPs. And most MSPs can point to increasing revenues over even a longer period of time, depending on how long they've been in the profession. And yet there's a growing disconnect that I would like to talk about. That's the topic of today's episode. And that is that many MSPs are actually making more money, but keeping less of it. They're growing their top line, but their bottom line isn't growing at the same rate. And that's a really unpleasant experience when you realize that it's happening. To a lot of MSPs, they don't even know that it's happening, right? Until it's too late, or they let it go for too long of a period, and then they have to course correct and make some really drastic changes sometimes. But MSPs who are busier, who are closing more deals, they're having some success on the sales side. They carry more risk. They're managing more vendors. They're supporting more technology tools. And they're shouldering a lot more in terms of customer expectations than they've ever had before. It's not whether MSPs can grow. The question that we should be asking is, can MSPs grow profitably? Not can they grow, but can you grow profitably? And those are not always the same things, because to show a profit, you have to do a lot of things. To close a deal, you have to do a lot less to close and drive revenue. I'm not saying that that's easy by any means, but as easy or as difficult as it is to close revenue, it's a lot more difficult to be profitable as a managed service provider. That's what we're going to talk about today. So our first kind of major theme is, if your revenue is going up, why isn't your bottom line? Why isn't your net profit? Why isn't your the money that you keep at the end of the year, why isn't that going up at the same rate as your top line revenue? And I think the core theme for this segment would be called, if many MSPs do mistake growth for business health. They are not the same thing. They are absolutely not the same thing. Revenue growth can hide operational efficiencies in a number of ways and for a number of reasons. Now, you may be thinking, why would driving growth hide a inefficiency? It may not hide an inefficiency, but it may certainly distract you from looking at other areas of your practice that are necessary to look at and constantly review and keep a close eye on in order to keep them in line and to make them successful in driving bottom line growth that is achievable and desirable. Just like you would look at your sales and your marketing, you have to look at your service delivery and other aspects of your business that impact your bottom line. So my first kind of admonition, if you want to call it that, or suggestion is don't look at just adding customers and think that that's going to automatically improve your margin. Just for the same reason, I wouldn't say that adding new services is necessarily going to add or improve your margin. Those are very different things. Which is why I'm always very cautious in advising MSPs about vendor sprawl, tool sprawl, because that can really add to your bottom expense line and drive up the expense of your cost of doing services, delivering services, and obviously it could drag down your bottom line in a number of ways. I didn't really answer the question that I asked. Right? Why is this happening? I think that this is happening because there's a lot of MSPs out there who are hearing success stories of their peers who sold to, other MSPs. Maybe they sold to a private equity firm and they're thinking, this is my payday. How do I follow that path of success? And, doesn't take that long to figure out, well, they seemed to be laser focused on driving growth. They were selling more and more, and they really didn't pay a lot of attention or as much attention as maybe they did before when they weren't up for sale. They didn't pay attention to the bottom line. And I think that that could be a very easy explanation for why we're seeing MSPs who complain about margins getting squeezed. Now, I'm just talking about, I'm trying to draw a correlation between top line revenue and bottom line profitability. There are other reasons, which we will get into momentarily, that explain a little bit more of external factors that may weigh down your bottom line as an MSP, but we'll get to those momentarily. Right now, I'm just suggesting that you consider what is it that you really want, right? If you're just starting out as an MSP, I wouldn't be just laser focused on top line growth and at all. I would be picking the right customers. I would be onboarding them very carefully. I would be looking very carefully at bottom line, because your bottom line is going to fuel a lot of your growth, right? Unless you're a venture capital backed entity where you can just drive a lot of cash burn to fuel your growth, you're going to have to be like the rest of everyone who they use existing cash flow in order to drive growth. That means you have to generate a profit at the end of the day. It is not just about driving growth at the top line. You have to be efficient in your movements. You have to be scalable. You have to have the right selection of vendors, the right tools, the right services that you can profitably deliver to customers that that they like, obviously, but that you have to be able to make money doing what you're doing. So that's my kind of first bit of advice is don't look at and expect your top line success to necessarily mean that you're going to have success in your profit margin. They are not correlated in any way. You really have to pay attention to both if you want to be successful in managed services. The second key theme I want to talk about is tool sprawl. And this is a much bigger issue. I don't have time in this segment, in this episode, to talk about this in its full and do it justice, because there is a lot of pressure, a lot of stuff being sold to MSPs right now, and for the last decade or more, that has really started to weigh down MSP profitability. You've had, certainly over the last 10 plus years, a lot of private equity consolidation in the vendor market, which has turned, I'm not going to make a positive or negative statement on this front, but you've had a lot of those companies do their own consolidation. They've bought up a lot of other tools and they've started to increase their prices. They are in what other people call value extraction mode, right? So they're buying up other companies, they raise the prices, and then you get to shoulder a lot of that burden. I'm not saying that that is the sole purpose. I am saying, though, that there is also a rationale that I know is happening because I've talked to MSPs, and this is what they say to me as a chief concern and something that they are fixing or in the process of trying to fix right now to help them with their own profit margins. And that is when they have had to buy or develop tools, extra tools, and go through extra expense to do things like integrate tools that a vendor bought their favorite backup vendor, or they bought their favorite password management company, right? And then they used to talk to each other, or they thought that they were going to be connected, and the vendor never bothered connecting the two of them. They never integrated them, but they increased the prices. So the MSP has to go out and figure out new ways to make everything integrate, and they go through a lot of expense and a lot of time. This is what MSPs tell me. So I'm just passing that information along to you guys out there. Tech stack bloat. Probably as good a name as any, but that can certainly add to your bottom line inefficiency and cost overrun for things that previously you would never have had before, or you've never had to pay that much money for. You can certainly see that also, through no fault of any vendor, if you are starting to have a spread of your customers in terms of different services, different customers demand more services, so you have to buy more tools. And the more tools you buy, it's almost like starting up a whole new business line. If you're previously an SMB, and then you get a couple of mid-market or enterprise customers, and then they force you to go out and buy some new, perhaps quite costly tools to compete and to service those types of new customers. Also, very realistic outcomes. The point is, you have to keep an eye on your tech stack, because if it starts to go a little crazy, get a little hairy, get a little out of control, it's going to impact your profit. You better believe it. It's going to impact the profit. And so I think based off of what I have seen over the last several years, I have seen MSPs who have, and I've talked about this in previous episodes, who have gone to great lengths. It is not easy and it is not cheap what some of them have been doing in ripping out legacy 15, 20 plus year relationships with specific tools. They're ripping those tools out and they're replacing them with newer tools that will allow them to achieve greater efficiency. It's not even, I've had a number of MSPs tell me this, it's not even that they're replacing a legacy tool with a new tool that is less expensive. Because in some cases, I don't want to say all, but in some cases, the MSP said, well, it's not really cheaper. So I said, well, why do you do it? They say, well, because we're going to be able to do a lot more with less. We'll have the same spend, but we're going to be able to scale a lot faster, a lot bigger than we would have with our existing legacy stack. Some people are just cutting costs, right? They're just cutting costs because the legacy relationships have gotten too expensive. I think that there's a lot of reasons why it's happening. The point is, it is happening. We're seeing it. It's not a secret. I mean, everybody knows about it, even if nobody's talking about it, except here on MSP Zone. But there's a lot going on right now in terms of tech stack renovation and kind of spring cleaning. And it's been happening for a couple of years, and I suspect that it's going to continue to ripple and get bigger before it starts to resolve and wind itself down. So look at your tech stack. And I think you ought to be doing this not every 5-10 years. I think you ought to be doing this every year. And I think you ought to be doing it maybe even closer, more sooner or more regularly than that even. But certainly no less than annually. You should be looking at your tech stack and saying, is what we have currently suitable to the customers that we have? And ask yourself very real questions. Does it work? Are we profitable with this lineup of technology tools? Are the customers happy? Are our technicians happy? Does it work? Is it producing the effect that we want, the outcome, the business outcomes that we want, that our clients want? And of course, can we afford it? is this the type of tech stack that's going to be able to scale with us? Or do we have to go look for a different tool vendor that's going to be a little bit more suitable to the type of customers that we're looking for? You have to ask all these questions. Not easy questions, I understand, but you have to ask them. Number 3, certainly I am not unaware that customers are also wanting more and more out of their MSP and increasingly unwilling to pay more and more out of their budget, right? They want more for less. Everybody does. But the issue here is with the MSP service catalog expanding, just like the tech stack, we talked about in the previous segment. Your service catalog also has to be monitored very closely. And I would say once a year minimally, you should be looking at what are the service offerings we deliver to customers and what is the cost of delivering these services. Now, right, it's easy to figure out what your tech stack spend is, right? You add up all your vendors, you figure out what you're paying on a monthly or an annual basis, and you say, okay, this is what our cost is, and is this acceptable? Figuring out what your service catalog is and how much it delivers. There's not a lot of MSPs who have that set up this way, and I would really recommend you do it. We've started to see this in the MSP Verify certification program, where we are starting to audit and test along service catalog lines, which makes it a lot easier to correlate the service catalog, the service line, with a specific tool that it is used to deliver that service, right? So if you're delivering backup as a service, you might have a vendor Y backup tool that is your cost for delivering that backup as a service line, right? Makes sense. And so you would have that for endpoint management. You might have 2, maybe 3 for endpoint management. You might have something for general monitoring, and so on and so on. If you do that, not just with an eye towards which controls are being correlated between service line and the technology tool that is used to deliver the service, but if you start to then draw a financial line underneath that as well, you will start to have a really good picture of what service lines are profitable and which ones are less profitable, or which service lines are not profitable. And believe it or not, that might be a really eye-opening exercise if you've never done that before. Because you may find that it may have nothing to do with the vendor, right? I'm not trying to push all of this onto the vendors. But it could be the cost of the vendor that you're using is too expensive. It could be that you're not priced enough, right? That's always a potential, right? That you just don't charge enough. You undervalue what you do. I wholeheartedly believe that there are a lot of MSPs that feel very, what's the word? They don't have enough faith in their own value to their customers. And that's always been something that I'm keenly aware of. And I don't like to see that because, I'll harp on break-fix companies all day long and the lack of value that they bring to things. But true proactive managed service providers, I don't like to see them undervalue what they do at all. In fact, I think most of the time they could raise their rates quite handsomely and still be, too low relative to the value that they're bringing to their customers. But that's a separate issue. But yeah, you definitely should be doing a service catalog review on a regular basis. Look at the tools that you're using to deliver those services, match the service lines to the tech stack that used to deliver, and do an analysis of profitability on each one of those areas. You might also find, I'm hoping, if you have a profitability problem that is not correlated to your growth, let's say you're growing reasonably well, but you're not seeing that bottom line trend line go up, you may just be inefficient in some of your service maneuverings. Charles, what do you mean by that? I'll give you a couple examples. Let's use backup, right? I just brought up backup as a service. So let's say maybe you are just trying to think of something that would make sense. You're you don't have a standardized process of how you back up the data. So maybe you pay a single technician to go in and manually do and run all of the backups. Some of you are probably groaning out there saying, well, who would do that in 2026? Well, you'd be surprised. There's probably a lot of companies out there who think they're an MSP, who think that they're very proficient, but maybe they're doing a lot of stuff manually. That would be a great starting point for revamping your service delivery for that service line and starting to do things like automate your backups, starting to automate your test restores, right? Starting to automate as much as you can with that one service line so that the humans involved in that process are overseeing, but not actually doing the work, right? They oversee the automation that is taking place. They make sure that it is taking place. They make sure that the quality output is there and all of that. Those are the types of reviews that you should be doing at a service level. Not to be too redundant, but you get what I'm saying. So I just think that you need to do a review of what clients are buying. Are you efficient? Are you not efficient? And then when you're done with that, then you will have a really good understanding of, am I charging too much to my customers? Am I not charging enough? If I am charging enough, maybe our margin problem is not what we're charging to the customer, but we're just way too inefficient in how we deliver the service. So we need to work on that. Or maybe you come to the conclusion that we're just paying way too much for the backup tool and we have to find a different backup vendor. I don't know what the result would be. But doing that review will yield a lot of useful information. Okay, next point. Cybersecurity is absolutely necessary, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily profitable. And that is a difficult thing to say. It's a difficult thing for some of you to hear. Cybersecurity, no doubt has become mandatory. But there are still a lot of MSPs who don't understand the financial impact of delivering cybersecurity solutions. What does that mean specifically? There could be, I'm not saying this is, in every single scenario, but there could be in your MSP practice an increase in your cost of delivering cybersecurity offerings, in your labor costs. Maybe, in 2021, you hired a whole bunch of CISSPs or a bunch of CISAs or whoever to come on board and start to energize your cybersecurity practice and offerings. Maybe you started to really invest and you never really pulled back the stick, so to speak, on your training costs, right? You want to train your internal people to be a bit more effective in cybersecurity, and maybe that's an increased cost that you're starting to shoulder. Documentation, compliance obligations, liability exposure. You're having to pay more for your insurance. Hopefully, not too much more if you're using MSP line insurance. Small little plug there, but all of those things can add up, and so every security service introduces an ongoing operational overhead that you have to be aware of and monetize. Otherwise, you're just going to consume it, and it's going to hit your bottom line like a brick, and it's not going to feel very good. When you are an MSP and you're told you have to be delivering cybersecurity, my concern is that over the last 5+ years, there have been a lot of you out there, maybe some of you listening to this program, who added cybersecurity because you felt you were guilted into it. You were told you're not a real MSP unless you were an MSSP. You've all heard that before. And so you thought, well, how do I add cybersecurity? Well, maybe I have to go and sign up with a whole bunch of new vendors, right? We had this conversation earlier, and you do that, and then what happens? You realize, hey, I'm offering cybersecurity, but wow, that had a huge impact on my bottom line. Now, I am not saying that you should go back to where you were pre-pandemic or start to cut your cybersecurity. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, again, you need to be cautious and aware of what does your tech stack look like? How efficient is it in your delivery of services? How efficient are you in the delivery of cybersecurity services? And are you just in general well positioned for all the cybersecurity services in your service catalog? If you are not, you need to maybe make a change. Maybe you need to consolidate some tools. Maybe you just have to look at all the different service lines and figure out, what is being consumed, what is not being consumed, and make some adjustments there. The danger would be that cybersecurity becomes commoditized in your MSP practice, and you are delivering at the cheapest cost, at the cheapest price point, that is, cybersecurity solutions which cost you the most amount of money to deliver relative to other managed services that you are delivering in your service catalog. Does that make sense? Cybersecurity is not cheap, right? It's kind of the hot topic and has been for many, many years. And I think it will continue to be for justifiable reasons. But I think you have to bear some responsibilities, MSPs, and really look at, okay, maybe you signed up with your technology, your cybersecurity vendor 5 years ago, and you've never really looked at what the market is like today. Maybe there's some less expensive offerings that are just as good. A lot can change in 5 years. A lot has changed in 5 years. The challenge is, how do you keep cybersecurity in your MSP practice? Keep it relevant, keep it efficient, highly automated, but profitable. It's got to be profitable. Otherwise, it's not worth it. It is not worth it for you to be in the cybersecurity game and not be making money at it. You have to generate a profit. Otherwise, you become a liability and dangerous to all of your managed services customers. So make sure that your security services generate margins that reflect the expertise, the effort, and the risk required to deliver them. Okay? Moving on, I want to talk about AI real briefly. AI has the potential to, and probably is, creating a profitability gap. And what does that mean? That, in my opinion, and I'm not the only one saying this or thinking it, but AI has created a demand before it has created a revenue opportunity. Now, I've talked to a ton of MSPs who say the exact same thing, which is they're kept busy right now by customers who are engaging with them and asking them a ton of questions around artificial intelligence with very little commercially viable answers that the MSP can give, outside of just, hey, I could sell you a Copilot subscription for 1 year to go along with your Microsoft 365. Would that be good? Would that be of interest to you? And of course, I'm not minimizing that product. It's a good product. But that's not the conversation. That's not the only conversation MSPs are having with their customers, right? They have customers who are saying, no, we want more. We want to do some crazy things with artificial intelligence. Can you help us? If you're not careful, it's really easy to fail to monetize that type of engagement where it's not a managed service yet, right? I think that we're far from a period where there's a majority of MSPs who are delivering a managed AI service offering. I know some of you are out there, but it's a relative minority compared to the population at large. I think a lot of MSPs are engaging in conversations, probably a lot of free conversations where a lot of value is being transmitted from MSP to customer without it being officially labeled a professional service, without it being labeled a consulting or advisory service with a fixed fee or an hourly rate attached to it. I think there's a lot of MSPs who are just giving a lot of time to customers and entertaining a lot of what if scenarios, but they're not monetizing and they're not making money. And that means you are burning resources unnecessarily. So what type of advice am I talking about? What are MSPs talking to their customers about? Well, there's a whole host of issues, right? Customers want help with, how do I adopt AI? Not even relevant to that, or coming up in that conversation is, should you even be talking about AI? Some fields are better suited for AI than others, but it still has to be a conversation that you have with your customer. Why is it that you want AI? I think a lot of customers are just saying, no, I just want to know how to adopt AI and incorporate that into our business. MSP, figure out a way to do that. MSPs typically respond, at least the MSPs that I'm talking to, MSPs will typically respond to that question of, hey, can you help us, incorporate AI into our business? And MSP will then say, well, have you thought about how you're going to govern it? Are you going to monitor and manage it? To which the customer might say, well, isn't that what you do as an MSP? And well, there's maybe, maybe not, right? It's not as easy as that. I think all of you are aware of this. AI is not just a simple line item SKU that you can sell and deliver and never think twice about. There's a lot of societal, public policy, legal risk, data governance, data privacy, data protection related issues that you have to think about as an MSP before you could say to a customer, yes, I will help you incorporate AI into your business, whatever that may be. And so there's the MSPs that are having these meaningful, really significantly valuable conversations with customers. I think that there is very little to no additional charge going on. And I think that's a mistake. I think you as an MSP ought to really reconsider your posture because you are an expert in what you do. You do it well. I'm assuming all these things, of course. And so it's valuable, your opinion on things and how to do things. And if your customers are coming to you with this need for your valued input, it should be charged for. Everyone's familiar with the old phrase, right? Free advice is worth exactly what you paid for it. I think that that's a true statement here. So before you go out and start to research the next AI platform or the next AI tool on behalf of your customer, or before you start to spend a lot of time in developing AI policies, you should have AI policies for your own MSP practice, but before you start to spend a lot of time doing that for your customers, testing tools, doing demos and things of that nature, you really need to look at, okay, are we just in an R&D mode because there's a value in doing that, and maybe some customers just want to have an R&D kind of experience. But again, R&D has a cost, right? It's a value. It's an incredibly valuable thing to do. Talk to your customers, ask them what they really want to do, and ask them ultimately, like, we can help you, but we're going to charge you. Do you still want us to help you? And you may or may not get the answer that you're expecting. Next issue. I'm going to talk about risk-based pricing. I've talked about it before, but in the context of driving top-line growth and maintaining healthy bottom line profit margins, you need to have an effective pricing model in your MSP practice. And I am a big, big fan of risk-based pricing. There's a lot of different variables. Or different names that people use. I like risk-based pricing. It makes sense. Just hearing it, you don't have to think really hard about it. And of course, when I say risk-based pricing, I mean that contrary to, or comparing it to a traditional kind of seat per user per device types of pricing models, which can still be used with risk-based pricing, but I wouldn't be leading with per seat, per user, per endpoint, per device pricing models without having a healthy element of risk analysis and deliberation that takes place. So for those of you who are saying, well, yeah, I don't remember what you said before on risk-based pricing, I'll give you a really quick summary here. You take two customers. Each customer has 50 employees. Two customers with 50 employees each do not necessarily mean that they are going to have the same type of risk. Risk for a managed services customer comes in a variety of flavors and in a variety of different ways. It can be based off of industry, right? You could have a 50-person company in your portfolio that is maybe in the restaurant business, and then you have a 50 employee company that you're servicing that is in the Department of Defense or Department of War, Defense Industrial Base. Very different risk, right? Very different risk profiles, and you ought to charge accordingly. You may have different regulatory exposure for one of those customers and more so than the other. You may have different security requirements. We talked about that before. You may have legitimate service vertical driven requirements to have different types of service offerings requiring different types of service technologies to deliver those, and they could vary based off of customer to customer requirements, maybe different verticals, maybe different geographic considerations. There's a lot of different variables. The point is, you cannot look at just two identical companies, at least from a headcount standpoint or an endpoint standpoint, and say, I'm going to charge those two companies the exact same amount of money, because they could be wildly different types of companies in the type of risk that they present to you and in the type of services that you would have to deliver to those otherwise identical companies. That is what I am talking about. That is what we talk about and what we mean when we say risk-based pricing. You have to have that in your catalog. And if you are, a very process-oriented company with a process-oriented sales and marketing machine, you might say, well, how am I going to do that? Does that mean I have to have an additional SKU for every type of customer? It doesn't. But it does mean that you have to recognize it. And there are some very simple ways. I don't have time to get into it now, but there are some achievable and simple ways, in my opinion, that you could have a risk-based pricing methodology in your MSP practice and still have a highly efficient, repeatable, scalable sales machine, with product SKUs and a process that is really nice, but still implements a risk-based review and methodology that will safeguard you against kind of those additional risks depending on your customer by customer need. Finally, profitability as an MSP is a maturity issue at the end of the day. Most profitability problems are symptoms of larger operational maturity problems that are happening elsewhere in the company. And it's difficult to generalize, folks. I wish I could say it's one thing specifically. It may be in your case, it may not be. I can only talk about what I see in general and try to make that as an abstract learning point to help you maybe fix problems that you might be seeing otherwise and you're not sure how to go about fixing. Highly mature MSPs tend to have standardized service offerings, meaning that they are written down. They have, if not a product SKU necessarily, they have a service catalog, right? It's a articulation that's documented someplace that says, these are the services we deliver. Standardized service offering. Highly mature MSPs tend to have consistent delivery processes. That means that they can deliver those services over and over again with highly repeatable outcomes, right? The variance of the quality of the service outcome isn't all over the place. It's very, very consistent, repeatable, and the same type of output. Highly mature MSPs have strong internal controls. And I don't mean they bought a GRC tool that they play with, a couple of hours every week, and so they think that they have a good internal control set. No. Highly mature MSPs have specific controls that are specific to the MSP industry that are unique to what they do, and they articulate and help describe what the MSP does and how they do what they do. That's what I mean by strong internal control. Mature MSPs have very well-defined pricing. They also have automation at work anywhere they possibly can if it makes sense. If it can be automated, it is automated for the highly matured MSP. For the less matured MSP, maybe they have one or two things that are automated, but maybe the majority of their practice, their service delivery is really still manual. It's a very big difference. Finally, highly matured MSPs do conduct on a regular basis standardized, regular vendor reviews. It's not just for risk. It's for risk, but it's also for, do they still meet our need for whatever service line they match up to? Less mature MSPs, by contrast, you know, they will trick themselves and they will say, it pains me to repeat it because I don't want you to, if you say this, I don't want you necessarily to think that you're a bad MSP or a less mature MSP, but I hear a lot of MSPs that struggle and they try to rationalize the struggles that they're dealing with, which is really they're trying to rationalize their highly manual, non-automated, non-scalable service delivery as highly customized. And yeah, I suppose there could be some really highly matured MSPs who have highly customized services. But in reality, you can't have every single line item in your service catalog be highly customized for every single customer because that is not a scalable managed services experience. I'm sorry, but that is just not the case. If you describe what you do as highly customized across the board, the chances are that you are probably not scaling. You are probably highly manual. You are probably making a fair amount of mistakes in that just because it's human nature and you can't have a highly manual process that isn't also error prone. You will also almost guaranteed have service creep, which is you're going to have a service that because it's not well defined, it doesn't have a set of documented internal controls governing that service line. You're going to have service creep that kind of maybe expands and contracts without you even knowing it, just because it's not very well documented to begin with, and so it creates a lot of flexibility and a lot of change that is not good inside an MSP business. Less mature MSPs often, kind of dabble more than they should with the reactive types of support models and reactive types of customers. Again, very frequently making the claim that, oh, my customers just aren't ready for this, or, they really value us as well. The reactive customers. I'm sure they do, but that doesn't mean that they need to get it from you. And it doesn't mean that you ought to indulge them in their fantasy of being secure or being well tended to as a customer when you know that they ought to be, throwing away reactive IT consumption and moving towards proactive IT consumption. Less mature MSPs will also struggle with inconsistent Pricing. We talked about, risk-based pricing before. When you have a less matured MSP practice, you will tend to have your pricing all over the place because you'll have less discipline in enforcing standardized pricing across all of your customers than the more matured MSP. And then finally, and what the whole topic of today's episode is about, the less mature MSP typically will have poor visibility into their own financial performance. How the MSP is doing. Is it profitable? Is it profitable on a service line basis, on a customer basis, on a customer segment basis? I think too many MSP business owners are asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, how do I grow faster? You should be asking, how do I become more profitable? Because the things that make you more profitable, they're going to make you more desirable to do business with. Meaning your customers and your prospective customers are going to like you better as a more profitable MSP. Now, some of you might say, well, all I need to do is raise my prices and I'll become instantly profitable. Is that the path forward? Not necessarily, right? The demand for managed services is through the roof. Managed services growth is undeniable. Businesses need the help of their MSP. They need help with cybersecurity. They need help with general IT issues. They need help with compliance. They need help with cybersecurity. They need help with so many different things. Demand is not the issue. you have to make profitability the issue with your company, right? Growth will take care of itself. You can find a way to grow the top line. No one is going to help you with the bottom line. You're going to have to do that yourself. If you're not in a peer group, join the Inspire peer group. Identifying that you have a profitability issue is problem number one. You have to realize it. You have to acknowledge it before you can even start to identify the cause of it, before you can even begin to identify how to solve the profitability issue. But it is solvable. So if there's any glimmer of hope in all this, if you're looking for a way out, I'm telling you there is a way out because there is so much demand. There are not enough good MSPs out there to do the work. And if you want to be one of those good MSPs, there's more than enough top line revenue to go around, and there's more than enough knowledge, documented best practice about what it means to be a good MSP that you should be able to do these changes very quickly on your own. You don't have to hire a consultant to do it. I mean, you can if you want, but you don't have to. These are documented, it's publicly available information. If you need help getting pointed in the right direction, call MSP lines. We will give you help, for free. If you need it, we'll get you help. But you need to look at your profitability. You need to look at what are you doing wrong that could be fixed to make sure that your bottom line gets healthy and sustains your MSP practice for yourself and for all of your managed services customers. I hope this helped. It's tough, but it's a solvable problem. And I know that because I've seen so many MSPs who have been in that issue and they've solved it. So I know it can work. It can work for you guys as well. Until next time, stay safe, get certified. See ya.